My topic for this presentation is international mitigation issues. So first we need to define mitigation. What is mitigation? Mitigation is the active implementation of preventative measures to reduce the loss of life, property damage, or other impacts related to disasters. Basically, what we want to do with mitigation is reduce all the risks involved with different hazards. Let's talk climate change. Climate change is an international issue that affects society on a global scale. This means that everyone is impacted by climate change, and these greenhouse emissions that are becoming more and more common from different countries are creating detrimental effects to the ecosystems. This is leading to more intense natural disasters, animals and humans being affected negatively in their day-to-day functions. So mitigation for climate change is extremely important. For mitigation for climate change, the goal is to reduce the future impacts of climate change on human life and the earth. This image is just to explain the greenhouse effect and how it affects our planet. So you could just look at this. A large international mitigation issue is developing countries. Developing countries are experiencing economic growth, and alongside that comes a lot of greenhouse gas emissions produced by that country. There are not a lot of alternative resources that are accessible to them, and they want to experience economic growth, so therefore they use the means that are available to them. It's been speculated that within the coming decades, developing countries are going to be primarily responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions produced, like the most greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of developing countries have joined different organizations in order to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and carbon emissions that they produce, and a lot of them work hand in hand to reduce emissions, but also provide countries with other ways to develop. So renewable resources that help countries develop and all that. This chart just illustrates the amount of carbon emissions produced by a country and the relationship it has to its economic growth. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is an international organization focused on mitigation. They strive to reduce any hazardous living conditions produced by climate change. They provide an open dialogue for representatives of different countries and attempt to implement changes. This means that they aim to reduce the risks associated with climate change and would like to reduce any greenhouse gas emissions if possible and work with different countries in order to develop plans to sustain the environment. Not everyone wants to be part of organizations like this. A lot of leaders in different countries believe that if they do not use the industrial mechanisms that they're currently using, that they'll fail economically. With this, they have some sort of reason because it does cost a lot of money to switch over to more renewable resources. And for a developing country, this can be really hard and expensive. But there are organizations that help with this and provide different technologies and different strategies in order for them to succeed. A lot of resources are limited and primarily money. Developed countries are trying to cut back on their own greenhouse gas emissions, and this can be costly for them, and developing countries cannot depend on developed countries to fund them. So this is a kind of a barrier and problem and an issue internationally. There are some really awesome solutions to these issues. Low emission development strategies are a mitigation mechanism used to help countries develop policies and techniques that are going to help them reduce the greenhouse gas emissions they produce, but also help them develop as countries. This is really important because it helps the economy and it helps the environment. There's also nationally appropriate mitigation actions, which are agreed upon actions that both reduce emissions of greenhouse gas and contribute to the economic growth and development of a country. This affects both the short term and long term. There's a lot of room for growth within these. The Kyoto Protocol holds developed countries responsible for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions they produce. This image shows a bunch of really important information. It shows the mitigation side of the global thing to do within climate change, and the adaptation, which is the locally responsible thing to do, things that you can do on a smaller scale versus things that you can do on a larger scale. Thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.